Good evening to you, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are, whether you're watching this live or watching the recording. Eimear Burke here, and welcome to another fireside chat brought to you by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. So just type in your name and let me see where you're from. Hi, Birgit, I hope I've pronounced your name properly, from Germany. Jules from Wyoming. Alinea, I hope, from Vero Beach. And Elvira, ciao, from Italy. Wonderful. And Shanti from New Zealand. Oh, I'm very, very impressed. Good morning to you. And John from Utah and Ava from Belgium. Wonderful. Hi, Anne. Lovely to see you again from Montreal. And Stephanie from Utah. Cindy from Arizona. Another person from New Zealand. Wonderful. Bill from Michigan. Hi, Marjolaine. How are you? Lovely to see you here. And Jennifer, lovely to see you too. So Cornelia from Vienna, and Dania from Athens, beautiful. So hi, Lisa from Washington, and Sarah from Essex. And Jennifer's from Sussex, but from Ireland, really. So wonderful to see you all. So I was away last week, so I had a recorded conversation with Art Scarborough from Baton Rouge in Louisiana. So it's lovely to be back live again and to be able to see your comments while we're having this interview, because I always welcome your questions, your feedback, and it feels that you're part of the conversation as well. So let me introduce you to my guest this evening. We're going to France, and I want to welcome Harriet Sams. You're so welcome to this fireside chat, Harriet.
Hello, it's lovely to be here.
So obviously people will know from where are you, but you're not from there. So just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm in France, and we moved from the north of England about 18 months ago, just after the first lockdown in Britain. So we've been here, just getting our feet on the ground in the middle, sort of southwest of the middle of France, near Limoges, if anybody knows France. That's where we live right now.
Okay, and what brought you to France from the UK?
It's a few push and a few pull factors, just like anything really. We were pushed because we wanted to have an experience that wasn't England at the moment. You know, it's a tricky time to be in England in many ways, and we wanted to have a chance to travel with our children before they got too old. I think that was a really important aspect, because we were just watching time tick on, and I think anyone who's travelled with young children know that the older they get, it gets harder and harder for them to assimilate and to, sounds like the Borg, but to just become whatever it is that you're trying to desperately sell to them that is a good idea. So that became really important, and I think we just knew that it was the right time to do it now. So we left. We had a beautiful little cottage in a village in Teesdale, which we sold the week before the first lockdown, so sort of mid-March. But
Wow.
the people who were buying it were high risk, so they asked us to sort of stay for 3 months in a house that was sold, and it was quite incredible. We didn't complete until July, so we literally had this kind of period of time of utter grace where my husband had just quit his job, and kids were off, and we were preparing to leave, and we just cancelled the removal company. We cancelled all of these things, put TV license, got reinstated, and all these things that I'd undone, I put back into life, and just had, quite frankly, 3 months of quite an extraordinary period of farewell. Actually, it was a very powerful 3 months. And then we came over to France and just sort of plugged ourselves back into this life without trying to sort of not get ill, trying not to sort of move around too much, just try to be really sort of contained within the French rules. And now, sort of a year, 18 months after that, we're finally a lot more open, and there's cafes, and the kids are at school on a regular basis, and so it's been an interesting time yeah. Interesting. It's such a loaded word, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Says a lot and says. Oh, there's an echo. I wonder what the echo is.
It's not an echo on my side. I'm okay.
Okay. I hope it just doesn't come up on the recording. It's gone now again. It hasn't come. It's like these little gremlins come every now and again. I haven't had an echo in a long time, and I haven't done anything. Anyway, so what's your landscape like where you are?
If you know, do you know France at all?
I've been down through it when I was 17, but I've seen the Eiffel Tower from a distance. But I've been to Brittany, and that's the only place where I've kind of explored, other than driving.
In a strange way, geologically, I think it's similar to Brittany, because there's a seam of granite that sort of starts in the Massif Central where all the volcanoes were, and then it sort of makes a teardrop shape all the way northwest and it ends in Brittany. So it's like this sort of teardrop. So we're on the granite of the Massif Central. Everything's rock solid. You know, there's lots of quartz and, you know, all that sort of stuff around. So it's quite a powerful kind of landscape, lots of rock outcrops and, you know, knolls and things like that. So it's very powerful, very beautiful.
And are there any ancient sites there near where you are?
Yeah. And I think this is really important to me, actually. It's interesting that you're sort of asking me straight away, because my work, I'm an archaeologist, and I spent a long time being a prehistoric archaeologist, and my big thing coming from the north of England was all of the sort of megalithic sites and the stone circles and all of those sort of powerful places. And so coming to France, there's a tendency to want to go to Brittany because everybody knows about Carnac and, you know, Gavrigny and all these wonderful, powerful places. And France, the rest of France, there's very few stone circles. For instance, there's one up on the Alps, there's one somewhere else, and a couple of sort of chambered tombs. But there's lots of just dolmens dotted around, which anyone from sort of Cornwall will know. They're topped with sort of standing kind of like box-shaped stones underneath them with this sort of mushroom-shaped top. Which would have had a big cairn of stones over the top. So there's quite a few of those kind of dotted around. And there's one 600 meters from my house. Ooh. I know. And so I've got into this habit of going up at the dawn and being here for a whole year now. I've done all of the sort of festivals going up to the stones in, you know, very early morning or when the moon's shining, and just trying to be doing a sort of solo ritual. And just being with it. And occasionally one of my children comes up too, which is really special. And it aligns, so it's a very small kind of box with this big stone over the top, and it aligns to sort of south east. So when I went up on, it should be sort of winter solstice kind of alignment. I went up on winter solstice and of course didn't see anything, but I assume it's the right alignment. So yeah, it's they're there. They're not as flashy. They're not as you know, well kept as maybe in Britain and Ireland. We're used to really quite beautifully kept sites to visit. So there's not so many of those around, but they're there if you hunt. And it's a lot of it's about sort of making friends with local landowners and just sort of waving the archaeology pass and saying, "Can I go and commune with the ancestors, please?" You know. It's interesting.
You say you wave the archaeologist pass and not the druid pass. I'm just curious.
Well, that's interesting because I think I'm still a little bit shy about that at the moment, and I'm just trying to work out the kind of landscape of French spirituality. There are definitely druids around, and I'm very glad to have met, you know, in email groups and joined their kind of sort of virtual connections with Danny and people like that. However, on the ground, it's kind of either secular or Catholic, I think, at the moment. And, you know, so I'm sort of gently feeling my way in. But interesting that there's that kind of druidic, ritualistic, cultural aspect of how I watch how people do things. So everybody has pumpkin patches, and they love giving them away. They give them to children and things like that. So there's this kind of it's Halloween, but it's still their version of trying to give something to people, and still it feels quite sort of connected to that aspect of like reverence for the living, or and in the sense that we're going to become ancestors in our own time, kind of thing. But things like they'll put a candle in the windowsill at Christmas Eve, and that's for their dead to know that they're thinking of them on Christmas Eve, and little things like that, which I think are really quite beautiful.
The tradition in Ireland was to light the way for Jesus to be born, to welcome, because it was celebrating his birthday. But we also, and then at Samhain, we always like have candles in the window to remember the ancestors. So it's interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
And is Halloween celebrated there? I mean, culturally as opposed to spiritually?
No, not until the Americans brought it over recently. I think it's not really a thing, but they're embracing it because of its sort of modern cultural significance, really. So there's loads of other stuff like Ascension, and it's all very Catholic, and I'm not a Catholic. I was brought up in Church of England, and I tell you what though, I've been thinking about this, how I was brought up and what kind of things I can say about myself, but I actually think that my vicar, he was called Alan Thornhill, and during the war and after the war, he was a playwright in Broadway, and he had this beautiful American wife called Barbara, and she used to make these amazing chocolate brownies. And I was just this little kid just stuffing my face full of chocolate brownies. And I remember just thinking there was this two types of church. There was going to church and just being bored stupid and listening to the things that I wasn't connecting to. And I loved singing in the choir. I absolutely adored that. But then occasionally we would go around to the Thornhills to be babysat, or they would come to us and babysit, and we would watch his videos of his plays that he'd written, on Broadway and things like this. And I just remember just feeling like this isn't church. This isn't like, do as you're told and all this. This is really, really spiritual. He's a spiritual guide, and looking back, I think actually he probably had a hunch that I wasn't going to be a very good Christian, but I had a deep connection to spirit, and he sort of connected. I think he connected to that. And in fact, I have to show you this actually. I know it's not druidic, but I want to show you this actually. We left his places perished, and then he died about 6 months later, which I didn't realize until recently. But he gave me this, which is a little oak. It's a little oak Virgin Mary.
Wow.
In a little case.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and she sits on my altar next to my goddess, next to my Arwen, next to my feathers and things like that, next to, and she's, I think for me it's always been about that divine feminine energy that he sort of he must have tapped into even as a very young child. He must have realized that would resonate with me forever. So I'm in my 40s now, and so and it's so sacred. It's still that kind of sacred awareness. And I think if my druidry if it's reflected in my druidry, I think it's that kind of acceptance of those wisdoms and the divine feminine that comes through in lots of different guises, which I think he was probably the first to teach me that.
It's interesting because I mean he was Church of England, and I would have associated connection to Mother Mary would be very much a Catholic thing and not so much a Protestant thing. It's really interesting that he was able to recognize something in you and to be able to give you that. So,
Yeah.
and Anne here says, it's so good to know of someone who can recognize and to honor a different spirituality than their own. Absolutely, Anne. And I suppose that's one of the things about the order, is that we have so many people from different backgrounds who haven't had to abandon their original spiritual paths if they didn't want to, that they're able to integrate them. And I think I'm always fascinated at other people's spiritualities, not the fundamentalism, not fundamentalist expression of it, because then there's no room for me to share anything, but to be able to share different worldviews. I think they're just quite magical.
Yeah, and maybe necessary. It's just the optimist in me that when I'm given any kind of guidance, any kind of figure, it's like, instead of going, where doesn't this fit, it's like, how does it all fit together, and how do these beings, these wisdom lineages, this kind of way of being in a different geography, how does that all merge together, and we all have a common honoring of each other's ways of being. So I think that's why it's on my altar. I think it's not I'm not a Christian, and I'm okay with that, but yeah, the divine feminine and the Mother Mary and all of that sort of thing. Oh yeah, that's very precious, very precious.
And Ferdiad says, perhaps the best celebrants of any path can see that we have more in common with other faiths than our differences. I couldn't agree with you more, Ferdiad. Absolutely. And the more we can see our points of connection, the less conflict there is.
Yeah.
And it's also about celebrating differences, because that's what makes things interesting as well.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
So what brought you to Druidry?
Yeah, well,
from archaeology.
Well, yeah, I think in a sense that little sort of snippet about Alan Thornhill helps me to realize that there was always a very strong thread. And when I was 6, I wanted to be a nun. So I think in that sort of the spiritual aspect was done and dusted. But then I think, and so as a child, and I'm sure many people say this, as a child there is this natural connection to the living world, to deeper meaning, all that sort of stuff. But I think for me, I wanted to be an archaeologist because when I was 10, we went to the British Museum, and I just was like, wow, this is amazing. I want to do this for a job. I want to just dig up stuff. I want to really just explore the world. But also, I think on a deeper level, it really just made sense to me that there was stuff waiting to be found in the landscape, and that the landscape itself holds the key to understanding of on a human level, on an earth-based connection level. And so I became a prehistoric archaeologist, studied at Glasgow Uni, and dug in Ireland for 3 years, actually, on the N1, which is now the N1, around Drogheda.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And so I was really sort of, it's like looking back, I think, wow, I just went into Newgrange, as you do. You just sort of, again, throw your archaeology pass around and go, and in you go, and that we got taken into Nouth, and I think which one was it? Douth we couldn't get into, but we went in, unbelievable privilege and just incredible kind of learning. And so I think also, I knew that I wanted to study, and that what I wanted to study was connected to unraveling the whole connection and disconnection, and what was needed for us to really return to roots. And I think for me, the roots, which I know everybody's very different, and some people find their roots in lots of other different periods of time, but for me, the root of everything was the sort of Mesolithic and Neolithic. So we're talking kind of end of the Ice Age, 10,000 BC to about 3,000 BC. And I was just fascinated by that, just fascinated with the light touch of humans on the planet, fascinated with how we lived and live in a world that went from being completely barren and empty to burgeoning and changing around us, and how we adapted and all that sort of thing, and how we then flourished, and then subsequently, perhaps people would say, went into dire straits after that. But that seemed to me just so fascinating to know how if and when that happens, what can we learn, and what is it that we need to relearn? And so I studied that, and then I worked in Ireland, and then interestingly, I think I just got really jaded with the whole commercial archaeology. I'd turn up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and there'd just be noisy diggers and beeping and dust in the summer, and loads of mud in the winter, and everything was stripped back. So it was not a single blade of grass. It was just stripped, barren wasteland, which we excavated. And then the moment we excavated it, they would then pour the foundations for the houses, So I was digging in 2000, 2001, 2003, which was the Celtic Tiger time, where it was just like housing estate, shopping centre, new train stations, so we would just be literally a week ahead of the builders. Okay. And it just became so it was still beautiful archaeology, really finding amazing burials and houses and all sorts. But I became very disillusioned with the fact that I was part of this kind of development. I didn't want to be developing. I wanted to be retaining and feeling the magic.
A sense of colluding with it.
Yeah.
So and when you were so you do the dig, and then record everything you saw, document everything, and then it's covered up.
Yeah, so this is maybe a little bit technical, but when you strip the whole of the topsoil, so all of the grass goes, and that's going to be, say, I don't know, a 10-acre field, which is going to have 20 houses on it. You strip the entire thing, and then you map what's there. So there might be ditches and graves and all that sort of stuff. And so by law, you have to take the graves up, but everything else, if you've got an agreement, you only have to take 10% of what you see. So you take so if there's 100 meters of a ditch, you just take 10 meters of it in little slots, like meter here, meter here, meter here, and you go down. And so you're only really ever taking 10% of a site, and you then record as best you can. Obviously retain what you take, which then gets recorded and then put into Dublin Museum or something usually. And then unfortunately the way it is the houses then come in and get built, and that's the way it is. And I'm not a purist. I understand that, we can't just dig into pure earth. We have to recognize that we're going to be reliving on old ground, and that's the way it is. But there is something quite heartbreaking in a way about having to say goodbye to your own heritage, to say off you go, thanks for giving me this moment of connection. And I can't tell you, when occasionally, like for instance, digging if you've got any Irish people listening, there's which you probably will, there's just past Drogheda as you're going north, there's the slip road that goes up on, I think it's the first exit after Drogheda, and I was digging on that bit, and we found a Neolithic settlement for about the same age as Newgrange, so we're talking around about the same kind of period of time, and there were hearths that had been left. So what they'd done was they'd cook on a pot. The pot would be full of food, and then it would break. And then what they'd do is they actually leave it in the hearth and then use another pot, which would break. And so you get this kind of these hearths that have just got quite a lot of broken pot inside, and they just get blacker and blacker and blacker. And so I was digging one of these, and I had that moment of just direct connection to the person who was kneeling by that fire cooking. It was like 5,000 years had gone by in a day. It was really powerful. So those kind of moments really do happen. Like time travel, I've time traveled, it's true.
Wonderful. Alinea says there's some comfort in archaeological digs that what we relive above is the same as our ancestors did. They also rebuilt homes above each other too. Rebuild. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think towns are a perfect example of that. You know, that we're many layers above where it all began. You know, and that's the way it is. And I think that's just so evocative and powerful, definitely. But what turned me to the Druid path, I think, was eventually, yeah, it was. There was a few things. There was a hare that came to visit me when I was digging. I was digging a woman, and a Bronze Age burial just outside Laytown, if you know Laytown, yeah, north of Balbriggan.
Yeah.
And a hare I was just digging this grave, and just feeling connected, really connected. And we were all, there was a few of us, and we were all digging. It was very quiet, very respectful, very quite meaningful sort of time for everybody in lots of various different ways. And I was having this sort of fight in my head of like, could I carry on? This is just, I'm not sure about this. You know, is there another way to be doing this ancestral reverence rather than sort of just be two steps ahead of the bulldozers kind of thing? And this hare just came into my peripheral vision on the right hand side. She just looked across this barren sort of land that had been stripped back. And I looked at her, or maybe it was a boy, I don't know. And I looked at her, and she just looked at me. She had her paw up. I'll never forget it. I've got it like seared into my head. And she just had her paw up, and she just looked at me. And I just sort of sat back on my hunches and just was like, okay. And then she just sort of twitched her nose and just lolloped off into the next field, which was just a farmer's field. And I just sort of sat there going, okay, it's time to go. It's time to go. Yeah. And that was the first beginnings of all of this. And then Druidry OBOD was just one day. It was just like, okay, I've been an archaeologist for a long time now, and I know that there's more to all that I know, that archaeology is not giving me. You know, commercial archaeology, field archaeology is one part, big, important part of getting connected to the earth. But there's much more that's just not being spoken. So I just went on a little internet search and came across you, and then got the introductory Guernsey and had my very cynical head on, like, oh, you know, this better be historically accurate. This better be, you know, perfect, or I'm not interested whatsoever. And I was just so impressed. And I felt really like, yeah, homecoming feeling. I know everybody says it, but it was like, this is just really right. This feels really honorable. It feels really honest. It feels authentic. It feels really connected. And so I signed up, and the rest is history. So wonderful. Yeah. Wonderful.
So when you left your art,
then say that again. Sorry, you just dropped out there.
There was a bit of an echo. So when you left archaeology, where did you go?
So I then left Ireland and went to sort of travel around and just get my head together. And then I strangely became a probation officer in West Yorkshire, as you do. Well, basically, it was a convenience thing. I signed up to a recruitment company, and they put me in a probation service in Leeds, and I just sort of then got trained and became a probation officer for sort of low to medium risk offenders, which was brilliant. Actually, it was probably just what I needed, because it was just like really back into, like, you know, I've been out there in the ancestors, and, you know, all of that kind of, the dead are dead, and I'm sort of voyeuristically looking at what's remaining. But this was like right there, really active, really helping. Hopefully, I hope I was helpful, but really sort of just connecting to the here and now, and the sociology of place. And I learned so much. I got brilliantly trained, brilliantly supervised, compassionately, really learned how to deal with it. And then went to live in New Zealand to do it in New Zealand for a year. Yeah, and in Lower Hutt. So I was at the corrections office in Lower Hutt. But by then, the power of the call of Europe was really strong, actually. So I came back and went back into archaeology for a bit. Okay. Yeah, so it was really strong. I think, yeah, and it still is. And then I was made redundant. I'm sort of telling you my life history, Eimear, but I was. I hope people aren't falling asleep. It's really hard to keep up, actually, honestly. But I've just been. Then I was made redundant when I was pregnant, actually, with my first child, and then had to sort of then be quite adaptive, and got trained as a teacher and was teaching Italian first off at adult ed in a school in Carlisle, and that was really fantastic. It really taught me how to teach.
Okay.
But then I asked them, I said, can I teach archaeology? Because although, yes, I do know Italian and I'm, happy to teach Italian, my real love is ancestors archaeology, prehistoric archaeology. And they let me do that. So I put together a 10-week course for adult ed.
Ooh, lovely.
Yeah. And I was just fully immersed in going around. It was in the north, it was for Cumbria in the north of England, and I just went around, took loads of photos, and just put together this course. So yeah, that's what I did after archaeology. I've never really left. I think I've come back now. I'm back full circle, back again, really, studying again. So it's it's never left me, really.
So it's about either navigating or negotiating a different relationship to archaeology to the one that you had originally.
Yeah.
But that somehow that connection is still there, but it needs to be reestablished in some way, or in a different way that has more meaning for you, or greater depth, or linking in with your spirituality, I take it.
I think that's the key for me now, and I sometimes pinch myself because I'm now teaching or facilitating or, running things which are heritage connected, earth-based spirituality connected. That's what I do. Now I spend most of my time, actually just doing that, which took me years and years and years to merge together, really, the heritage and the power of archaeology, the power of what we've lost. I think what we've lost in terms of our ancestors and the wisdom of the earth, what's still in the land. I mean, the way I see it, and what I'm really interested in is we all know, or a lot of us now know, about nature-based therapy. It's now in the NHS. They'll actually prescribe going for a walk in the woods and things, and there's lots of stress busting and all that sort of stuff. But what I'm really interested in looking at is past humans, ancestors, as part of nature, which seems to be quite missing. It's one of the missing parts of the oikos, the parts of the earth connection. And I find that just so interesting because, of course, so much of humanity, so much of how we've existed, the good stuff and the terrible stuff, is writ large in the landscape. We just need to maybe have the way to navigate it so that we can do the learning, so we can go to sacred sites, we can go to Stonehenge, we can go to Gavrini, we can go to all those really powerful sites. But there's also other sites that are maybe not thought about that have even more power, perhaps, so for instance, quarry sites or fracking pads or polluted rivers, or, so stuff that you may not think is particularly therapeutic, but is actually still got so much to help us as individuals. I'm really interested in that aspect of therapy.
I imagine some people will be challenged by hearing that, because when you think of quarries, I know people say, oh my God, this is terrible, destroying the land, lowering the level of hills, fracking pads. How could you possibly think that was okay? Or how can you possibly find being by a polluted river healing? So can you expand on that?
Yeah, so I suppose it depends on the way that we see healing, I suppose, as well, and also it depends very much on what we as individuals need, so there's the way we could maybe say it is the earth can reflect back like a mirror, something that actually helps us heal, because it's not very pretty and it's not easy, it's quite challenging. So it can actually reflect back to us that part of us that says, I'm actually really hurting right now, for whatever reason that individual is hurting. So it could be something like, your friend is very ill or something like that. It may be that going to a sacred site or a beautiful place is the soothing healing that you want, but it may be that you actually want to go somewhere that's maybe abandoned, not pretty. It's a more challenging site, because there's part of you that needs the earth to reflect that in you, and that's where I think the druidic kind of animistic outlook that I have, which is all earth is sacred, whether you're at a sacred site or at a profane site, in inverted commas, one that's been damaged, one that's been, it used to be a factory that's been shut down, because it's still our earth, it's still earth. There's something of the earth in that place that can offer healing. It's just, it can be very challenging. And it's not, I think it's just part of the whole sort of suite of how we relate to the earth. And I think there's also something in there about being able to being equipped and being sort of brave enough in your space to be able to say, I'm going to go and make friends with, or make conscious connection with a place that used to be out of my sight, somewhere that I didn't want to go near. That's also quite difficult for people. But when it does happen, there's a whole process that you can go through when you're guided and given the support that can make actually a site feel very like, it's not an orphan anymore. There's that phrase of, a site that's it's just out of my consciousness, I don't want to think about it. It's that place at the edge of town, it's that they ruined it, it's disgusting, and it's a mess. So we've just sort of blocked it out of our collective consciousness, blocked it out of our cultural consciousness. And then there's something about turning towards it and actually saying, well, this is earth as well. And I can see part of me reflected in that. So that's a more challenging aspect of working with heritage. Really.
And it's interesting because there are a number of comments and they're talking about healing the land. That's not exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about being healed by these places that appear damaged, sore, no longer beautiful. Mm-hmm. And then somebody recognizes the concept of radical joy for hard times by Trevor Johnson. Mm-hmm. So do you want to speak a bit more about that? Because that's the challenge, where some people can go and say, we're going to heal the landscape because it's been ruined. And that's not what you're saying. Not that we don't heal the landscape. That's not, but that it's about how we find healing in places that are no longer seen as places of beauty. That there is a big challenge for many people, I imagine.
Yeah, but I don't think that they're unrelated. So I'll sort of explain that. So when there's somewhere really obvious that needs our direct help, for instance, when the Sheffield trees were being felled, activism was what we really needed, but we also needed sort of hearts and ritual and belonging to the trees, and the trees belong to us, and we're going to tell you about it. We're going to create this kind of reciprocal relationship between what's going to be damaged and the human experience of that. And that was really obvious. It was like on people's streets, but there's a lot of sites that don't have that kind of connection. So actually Radical Joy for Hard Times, whoever has mentioned that, is absolutely what this is about, which is before we can really do that work of activism and love and reconnection to what the land needs in itself, which may take the form of things like petitioning the MP or some activism in whatever way, we need to do certain steps in order to, as human beings, really belong to that space, and that space to belong to our consciousness, because otherwise it just becomes a sort of bureaucratic issue rather than really belonging to us. And if we sort of make that into the biggest picture altogether, if we're just constantly sort of blinding ourselves to more and more wounded sites on the planet, then very soon we're going to have very few pristine places that will be the only places that we can sort of feel safe. So there's actually a sort of a really important aspect to it, which is to make sure that we don't lose these beautiful places. They're no longer orphaned from our consciousness. They are absolutely fully in our consciousness. It can be very difficult. But as I said, there's charities already doing that kind of thing.
Because if I think, in terms of the people in my own life, the people who've become sick, who are old, no longer healthy, I know when my husband was dying, I stayed with him. It wasn't that he's no longer the man he's not the man I married, therefore I can't bear to look. It was like I still loved him right till the very end, and still do. And it's that you stay with people even if they have lost a limb, or they've now got scars. You don't say, I can no longer be with you because you're no longer beautiful. Why should we do that to the landscape? But we need to grieve then. It's that when you see the pain, I suppose the most damage I see is when the planted forests are cut down. We have a lot of monoculture pines grown here in Ireland that wreak a lot of havoc. And then when they're cut down, and to watch how ugly it is, and that always pains me. And I remember a few years ago, I was driving on the M6, and the motorway towards Galway, and I was passing through the Midlands, where I come from, where most of the bog is, and it's been most of the turf, the peat has been harvested. And to my joy, to see, because it's been left, all the native trees that have come back. And that's what I loved. It was like it does recover, and I thought that was really, really important. Sherry says, yes, we need to embrace all aspects of how to help and most beneficial ways to help natural species, natural places. I recently spent 36 hours with a dying whale on the beach where I live. Yes, I saw your post, Sherry, and that must have been really, really painful. But the gift is to stay with the dying whale. Or to stay with the place and finding some connection or love or joy within that. I think that is beautiful. Then this Te Aroha says something. Being First Nations, everything speaks, whether we're physically there or not. They're just as they are. The ancestor stories we feel through us as we walk the earth or travel in it. The stories play like movies telling their journeys.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think that's it, that there's so many stories. I mean, I'll give you an example. There was a woman I worked with on one of the projects that I did, who undertook a sort of attending to a wounded landscape, which was the back of the docks in Bristol. So not the kind of nice sort of esplanade where all the cafes are and everything, but the back bit. Because she had Irish ancestry of the workers who'd come over, who'd dug out all of this mess and all of this tidal mud, and people had died, and there's absolutely no recollection or sort of plaque or anything to say that, however many of these men were here doing this work. And she spent about a month connecting to that place, and it was just such a beautiful process for her, because it was, and she didn't realize, she sort of had a hunch. She'd lived in the area a long time. She knew that there was a backstory, a little bit of a backstory, but when she actually went to the place that was not singing and dancing, that wasn't sort of waving the whole, like, this is our heritage, this is, perfect version of it. It was her heritage. And it was messy, and it was dirty, and it was forgotten, and it had weeds all over it, and tidal mud, and everything was falling. and she just had this massive personal transformation in that experience. And I think that there's so many stories that we as human beings can really benefit from if we turn toward the messy side of our heritage as well, the difficult side of our heritage, the crap that we've done to one another, to the land, to actually bear witness to how many stories there are, and that we carry them on, that we carry them on. And I think that last comment is sort of really holding something inside me, which is the idea that if we like, for instance, if there's that old asbestos factory at the edge of the town that hasn't been used for 30 years and is just covered in weeds, if it may be that it will just be sold to someone and it will be developed and it will just be another corporate sort of headache, but if and we may never sort of influence what happens to it, that's not the outcome that we anticipate. But if we as individuals have gone and we have connected and we've noticed the type of flowers that are growing through the cracks in the concrete, or we've noticed just a kestrel that's taking nesting, or just these little things, the story that then subsequently unfolds is also part of our own story, and that's very important sort of social magic, I think, in a way. We're sort of making a connection to all of our landscape, and I think more. It's funny because as I said at the beginning, I started off being a prehistoric archaeologist and being really interested in that sort of period, and almost kind of protectionist about, like, what is it about the very ancient archaeology that is speaking to me. And now I'm sort of just talking to you, I'm just suddenly realizing that if there's one thing that they did, it was direct connection with their landscape. It was exactly them on the land. And maybe this is exactly the same. It's like you go to these sites with nothing, just you, maybe a group of friends. You go and you see that place for exactly as it is. And that's really kind of as simple as it must have been in the Neolithic time. You just turn up, you rock up, you feel the landscape, and you become a belonging member of it. Yeah. So maybe there's some.
It just struck me when you think of different. Oh, there's an echo. Anyway, when you think of people living in different climates, I mean, I love the climate here in Ireland. It's temperate. It was the first cold day today, but it was still fresh. I can get that beautiful fresh air, and I love how mild it is. And then there are other people who live in deserts, and others live in, extreme winters, extreme summers, and people adjust to the landscape they're in. Mm-hmm. And it's about, okay, I live in this environment and I accept it. So like people living in cities love their cities. Mm-hmm. And then others living in very remote areas love that too. Not everybody can love it, but it's about being able to accept it as it is. If there's anything to be changed, yes, but also to really, really engage with it as it is.
Yeah. On the micro as well as the macro. I love that, just the paying attention. And I think the Druidic path is all about that, isn't it? Slow down, breathe into your landscape, pay attention. What colors are around you? What's the smells around you? Notice the tracks in the grass, And I think that you can even do that in a city. You can do that in a sort of suburb that's up and coming. You can do it in the old, medieval quarter, where it doesn't really matter, and it's not about judging. It's about noticing that you're just sort of part of this sort of fleeting belonging, that this place is going to carry on in some way after you. And there's just something very. I think, for me, it's about just really breathing into those micro little noticings and paying attention. And I think on a personal level, and what you said about joy, on a personal level, it can be easy to get stuck in the grief or the sorrow or the rage, just rage that this could have been done so many times in so many different ways around the world. This being, the mess or the pain that actually we even have to have this conversation about turning to wounded sites. There's a part of me that really rages against that. But when I go to a site like that, when I go to, places broken or fallen or dangerous, the inquiry and the paying attention and just the slowing down moves me into love, and then sometimes even into joy, real, like, wow, there's a kestrel up there, oh my goodness, or I never knew that there was this little pool that's got frogs in it, or it's like if we just give ourselves the chance, we can really step into something truly joyous, and we need that. I think.
And it's the sitting still and spotting it. Was it Julia says, being a Londoner, you have to work harder to notice the little things around us. It keeps me more focused than perhaps I would if I had countryside all around me. Absolutely. I mean, I live in the country, and it's just, explodes with all sorts of things. But I'm always, there's a few people have said they love seeing, weeds propping up in cracks, and I love in the spaces between buildings when I see buddleia, the butterfly tree, just in spite of everything in a city, just coming up. And I love to see urban foxes.
Mm.
And I think foxes in many ways are safer in the cities than they are around farmers.
Yeah.
And I always get a buzz when I see those things in what seems to be desolate and concrete, to see these little things. Yeah, and I suppose it does take learning to be more observant and more focused, but it's there if you look for it.
Yeah,
and it's something subversive about nature that it does that in a place where everything is so controlled, and then in spite of it, it just
the dandelion effect. It's like, a bit of concrete, fabulous. There's something I read a couple of years ago, well-meaning gardeners' tips on how to stop your buddleias spreading uncontrollably, where after the flower you've got to cut the flower heads so they don't seed. And I just thought, no way, these buddleias are going to take off. We're not going to cut them down, thanks very much. We need as much joy and as many just to seed as possible. And I think that's also a thing for me, where well-meaning, tidy-minded souls, where there's a bit of wildness. But I would put something in there about the beauty of human creation within the biosphere. This isn't a lot of what I do isn't just about like go to a wounded site and have a look for nature. It's go to a wounded site and notice whatever's coming up, the good, the bad, the ugly, and often you can find real beauty, like human ways of being creative, being inventive, being artistic, are still dotted around the landscape in surprising places. For instance, it must be 2 years ago now. Yeah, oh gosh, 2020 did exist, but not really. It was 2019 where I took a little group down onto the River Tees, and we were just sort of taking things, bits of old bike, rotten old bits of, bits and bobs out of the river. And there was a lot of muttering about, littering and all that sort of stuff. And then all of a sudden we came across limestone, must have been a gritstone mill wheel.
Oh. And
we're talking, 2 meters across with a huge hole in the middle, and it was all smoothed. So it must have been in the river for years and years and years. And it was just lent on this kind of angle, half in, half out. And these tiny little minnows were darting around amongst it. And it was just like, how did this get here? All those sort of questions of like, what's it doing here? How did it get here? And then where's the mill? There must have been something. But it was just that sort of staggering shift from, here's a beautiful place, aren't humans terrible to be messing it up and to be creating so much litter, to this absolute beautiful moment of humans needed to feed themselves, and so have created this way of doing it. And then we've just got this little reminder, just half in and a half out of the river. It was just a very powerful moment.
That is lovely. You mentioned just your friend who was at Bristol, looking at where her ancestors had dug and died and all of that, and to acknowledge that. And I think there's something around recognizing what our ancestors have done without guilt and shame. It's about acknowledging it, because guilt and shame can be paralyzing. Guilt often can be a good thing. You know, I'd be guilty if I stole or something. But if I'm constantly motivated by guilt or by shame, then I'm not in a healthy place. And it's about acknowledging the past and maybe my own ancestors and what my ancestors did. I'm still not perpetrating it on the victims of my ancestors, but it's about, now I'm a future ancestor. And what am I doing now to go forward? I was in Germany at the weekend, and we did a workshop on ancestors, and it was around journeying back, collecting the gifts of our ancestors. How are we as ancestors today? And then also speaking to future descendants, projecting forward how the world might be. And I thought it was a really fascinating exercise, very, very healing for people. So again, you know, this thing about, well, aren't humans horrible? Look at, they're awful. And then being guilty about being human, it doesn't help us in terms of, we are nature, we are part of it. There are also animals who destroy nature. I've been in forests in Africa and I've seen what the elephants have done to trees, you know. So it's, and then obviously if you have a balance where you have predators and all of that stuff, but nature isn't perfect. It isn't nice, neat and clean. It can be violent, it can be aggressive, it can be dangerous. So it's like we are all part of this, and it's about it's the self-hatred is always a difficult place to start from. It has to start from self-love to move on to we are part of it. We are it. And how we engage then, I think, is a much healthier place to be.
Yeah. And I think it was Michael Mead, who's one of my favorite people to listen to right now, but he said about that sort of guilt and sort of what can feel like, you know, my heritage, my everything that you know I'm now awakening to is paralyzing me in this kind of sense of like guilt, and it's important to sort of stay with it, and that sort of sense of like, I'm not moving anywhere because I'm immersed in it. But at some point, the paralysis has to shift. Yeah. And that movement through is where not only do you heal yourself and then become of use because you've been sat in that paralysis for a moment, for a time, and really felt what you needed to feel, but then you start moving. And what's so beautiful is really when we can move into and beyond that paralysis, we can then be of help to other people. And that for me is the big thing, you know. And I think that really that's what the earth is teaching me, which is, you know, there's all of this kind of in the record, it's in the archaeological record, it's on the earth, it recorded for us to bear witness to it. Everything, all the stuff that our ancestors has done pretty much is there to see writ large on the landscape, the good stuff and the terrible stuff, and some of the stuff that's still not healed, you know, really open wounds, you know. So it's like we've got this chance right now, collectively, personally, to step towards that and be in that space, in that kind of, you know, that icky place, that powerful place, that hurt place, and then move through, and then be of some sort of service, so that we can be good ancestors. And that's pretty. That's sort of how it feels right now for me, I suppose. And the work that I do with Radical Joy for Hard Times is really pivotal with that at the moment. Really powerful.
So Healing Art says, beyond the paralysis. I'm taking that one with me this evening. So,
oh, good. Yeah.
So just Blake has something to say. I think that with all the aggression, violence, peace, joy, and all that is in nature, balance is always what we'd like. When things get out of, whoops, I've lost him now. Sorry about this. When things get out of balance, it's when we find real problems begin to start. However, that has just been my observation, and things are far more diverse and complicated than one's person's observations. So, thanks for that, Blake. What are you doing now? And maybe it's time to mention your project.
Yeah. Well, I think since the latest IPCC report, which is the International Panel on Climate Change, which is scientists who get together on a regular basis and give a report about the state of the Earth. And there was one in July that basically said, it's time to act. Things are really bad for a lot of people. A lot of different species are under extreme stress. And the planetary systems are under extreme stress, and it's time to do something about it. And since then, it's felt really right and proper that a space is held for people, members especially, of the order who maybe want to have a space that they can talk about their own direct experiences of what's going on, the climate problems, the biodiversity losses that they're experiencing, or any kind of system stresses that they're experiencing. And by that I mean floods, droughts, the fires, and also COVID as well, which is another thing that perhaps we can at some point look at as part of the collective. So we're setting up a monthly listening circle through OBOD for members, if it's the sort of thing that would be what you'd like to do. And it's really just a listening space where, imagine that we're in a cafe. It's going to be online, but it's very much just like popping into a cafe for an hour and talking to people who will just listen. And if that sounds like something that people would want to do, you're absolutely more than welcome to come. And it's going to be every first Wednesday of the month at 7 o'clock Universal Time, which is 7 o'clock British time, 7 o'clock Irish time, 8 o'clock Central European time, and 2 o'clock Eastern time in America, which I hope will help orientate people towards the time. And it's a really just a practice in having whoever wishes to use that space and be heard, and to connect to other people who are going through things in the globe, because we are such a global membership. You're most welcome to bring what it is that's in you right now that needs to be heard. And we'll have a few facilitators and volunteers who will be there to just encourage you to speak and to be heard. So I hope that you can come along. That'd be very good.
So they can get the details on the OBOD members page, Facebook page, and through the message board. Isn't that it?
That's right. Yeah. So if you're a member and you've signed into the members group, it's on there, and I'll put it again on there. There was a notice that went up last week with contact details so that you can get the link. The link won't be on open social media. You'll have to ask specifically for it, so that we ensure that it's actually going to be a space for people who really would love to practice that kind of listening for one another and to be heard. And yeah, I'll put another post on tomorrow.
Great.
And I think there's one on the Druidry forum.
That's right. The forum. Sorry, I get along with the technical logic, the language. Stephanie, it'll be through Zoom. Stephanie's asking.
Yes.
So when So, and the link will be there. The link to Harriet is on the. I mean, Blake is saying that. I believe the link is also pinned to the top that's of the OBOD members group as an announcement. So it should be available. And what is the name of it? It's what?
The OBOD Climate Listening Circle. And we just sort of imagine that we've got a room in the back of a cafe and we've got hot chocolates and herbal teas and we're just sitting around, and it's just, just tell me, how do you feel right now? What's going on for you? What was it like being in the fires in Australia? What's it like being in the floods in Germany? People have got direct experience, or even if it's still quite distant, it's still quite a concern, something that's not particularly bothering you particularly as an individual right now, but you want to still come. You're so welcome. And if you've only just recently started hearing about the climate problems in the last few months, you're most welcome. If you are a long-standing activist, environmentalist, climate scientist, and you also want to come and be heard, you're also most welcome. It's not about telling each other what to do. It's not about advising each other to live a certain way. This is not dogmatic in any sort of sense of the word. It's just a space where we can all just hear what it's like to be human right now on the planet as a druid, and we can hold each other in sacred space.
So it's not about lecturing. It's not about criticizing people for mowing their lawns too much or whatever it is. It's not about pontificating. It's not about educating people. It's not about changing their minds, but it's about listening and just allowing people in a safe space just to share how they feel.
Yeah, I think it goes back to your point, what you said before about being stuck, being terrified and being stuck. I think one of the things that keeps us paralyzed and keeps us stuck is not being able to talk about things because we feel so guilty. We feel so scared that we're not doing it right, that we end up not doing anything at all. And so this space is really designed to sort of say, we're in the not knowing. We're in the space of not knowing. We're in the space where all of the stuff we got told in the 80s and 90s about recycling and about carbon footprint in the noughties, all of that stuff is now perhaps way beyond us, or we need some, another way of looking at our lives, or even we're just completely brand new to all of this, and none of it is going to be judged. It's all about just finding that space inside us and guiding each other through it, being held by the fact that we are sharing our earth-based spirituality. I think that's the key that kind of threads us all together in a way.
It's beautiful. So we look forward to that. So that'll be the 3rd of, am I right? The 3rd of November, which is the first Wednesday of November at 7 p.m. Yeah. I used to call it GMT, and then nobody told me it had changed to Universal Time. And then I was doing that, and then I realized, oh no, that Universal Time stays static. And then in the summer, we go to British Summertime or Irish Summertime. So by the time it happens, it'll be back to Universal Time again, because the clocks go back, or whatever it is this weekend. Everything changes again. So Alenia says, I love the listening cafe. Maybe it will help people expunge the stress in a safe place rather than yelling at strangers and pulling items off store shelves. Absolutely. So it's
yeah, shouting at unsuspecting shop assistants. Yeah, definitely.
And there's something beautiful about being heard, in a non-judgmental space. And so often we get into rows with people or into conflict when I haven't felt heard. You haven't really understood me. And they actually, it's not about agreement. It's about actually being heard and acknowledged. And that makes a huge difference to how people are in the world. It may not change anything, but the important thing is to have been heard. And then for us, whoever else is in the circle, to have listened to other people. So,
yeah, it's so important. Yeah, I think one of the things, because I've done this a little while now with different sort of charities and groups, Radjoy being one of them, and Deep Adaptation and other places. And I think one of the things that I've really learned is that, what have I learned? Oh, I've forgotten. my phone just went off and my mind just went, is that that's it. I've learned that we're now stepping into a space where we so need to hear each other. We really need to hear each other's different ways of being from different places on the planet, with different stresses, with different experiences, which may not be on the surface in a material sense any relation to what we've gone through, but there's something in there that we may find that we hear it that just really resonates, and it gives us a sense of our own way forward, or that we hear someone speak and we reflect back what we've heard and they go, now I've heard my own words, I feel like something's just clicked in me, something's just healed in me. And so I think there is a magic between being listened to, but actually having the group sort of dynamic of listening and just holding that space. You become both the individual having that personal individual experience, but also the group sort of thoughts. You become shared, you share thinking, and it's very beautiful. But it's difficult, I'm not sitting here and saying, yeah, come along, it's going to be really great, because it's, this is tricky stuff. It's the thin end, it's the thick end of the wedge, sorry. And it's where I suppose, going back to my own sort of druidic practice and my own earth-based spirituality, in those many, many years of walking the land and speaking to the ancestors and lying in kists and being connected, it could have been easy to perhaps just become a guide and take people around stone circles and tell stories and keep my hand in occasionally with archaeology, but it's like actually what we really need, and what we as living ancestors really need is to do the sort of more difficult, dirty work. I think it's really important now. And if heritage and the way that we actually connect to the human, what humans have left behind, and not be judgmental, I think is potentially really important.
Jules says, exactly, it's quite difficult being an empath and not to be able to be proactive in these situations. Perhaps, like you'd said, it will help us to heal by this connection. I think so. And then Aqua says, connectivity in an unconditional way is something we could benefit from. Let the healing begin. I'll try to come. Thanks, my ladies. Donna. Yeah, and I think that's absolutely, you're spot on. Just something, you've frozen. Are you still there? Oh, you are. Okay. You mentioned deep.
I'm still here.
You're right. You mentioned just through, I think you've explained radical joy for hard times, but the deep adaptation, just for our viewers to explain what that is.
Yeah, so I haven't been really doing much in the last few months, but it's possibly something that is very contagious, and it has a lot of respect for druidic path, I think, actually, if anybody's interested. So deep adaptation is basically the idea of adapting. So many cultural things have changed, especially since COVID, but also, without looking at the ecological kind of stuff, adaptation is really on the cards right now. And deep adaptation looks essentially at 4 R's, which are, what do we need to relinquish? What are we still holding on to in our culture that's just no longer going to serve us, or is fading away, and we just can't let go? What is it that we really need to let go of? What is it that we really need to restore? Which could be really quite obvious, things like the Amazon basin, we need to restore biodiversity, all those sort of things. But there's also sort of the more subtle things that we need to restore. Is it that we need to reconcile? So that's a long list. And the other one is, I always forget what the 4th one is. Relinquishment, restoration.
Restore.
I can't remember. It'll come back to me. if somebody's got Google or Ecosia there and just put it into the chat, that would be really helpful. Just 4 R's. And so basically we can, guide ourselves, guide our family, guide our community, to just start to look at the givens in a different way. That we can look at, the way that we think of our food production, for instance. What is it within those the framework of those 4 R's? What is it that we can sort of maybe do differently about the way we produce food? What about the way we produce our clothes? What about the way we educate ourselves? Or, all of those sort of things. So there's lots of applications for deep adaptation.
Reconciliation.
Yeah. Reconciliation, restoration. I've only got 2 now. I can't remember.
Relinquishing first.
Yeah.
This is great, because you had it a few minutes ago. And then somebody says reduce, reuse, recycle, restore. Not quite that one, but
similar. Yeah.
Similar. It's really interesting, that notion of relinquishing. And it's a bit like the life, death, rebirth cycle, that often we have to relinquish something in order to gain something else. That if there's 2 things, something has to be relinquished in order to take on. And it's that allowing ourselves that space to let go and trust that something else, that relinquishing doesn't mean abandoning ourselves, that it's creating space for a new way of looking.
Yeah. There's a wonderful Quaker little history note, where I think it was William Penn would go to Quakers with the sword by his side, because in his day it was a status symbol to have a sword wherever you went, carried a sword. And the Quakers were obviously pacifists, and they didn't want to have any kind of weaponry, and also they didn't approve of, or even now people don't have social status as such. Everybody's equal, and so he would come to Quaker meeting with this sword, and he said to somebody, "I just can't get rid of it yet. It means too much to me." And she said to him, "Wear it as long as you can." And, so he just went, okay, nobody's going to force me. Nobody's going to tell me to relinquish this. I know the kind of expectations, when I'm ready and when I can no longer wear it, then I'll take it off. And I really love that kind of softly approach. I really hope, and, I pray to the goddess that we have time to take a gentle approach towards relinquishment. I think, part of me, that grief-filled part of me, feels that we haven't got much time. But I think that the softly approach to wearing our culture, wearing our way of being as long as we can, for us, I just don't want. If I do put myself into the future, and I think of myself as an older, I'm dead and I'm an ancestor, and I think we know those people, or I haven't got that choice. I've just got to relinquish it. How would I feel if it was taken from me? But maybe I've got the chance right now to go through that process of wearing it as long as I can, and then gently letting it go with the appropriate rituals, the appropriate, as you say, initiation into whatever's coming next. Maybe we need to start rituals of relinquishment. That could be quite.
That's right. And resilience is the 4th one.
That's
Healing
it.
Heart. Google. Thank you very much for that. There's something around, I know when there's things I can relinquish, if I have time to prepare. It's something, if something's wrenched from me suddenly, then I'm in shock. And I know that from the death of my father and my husband. They both died of cancer, and I had time to prepare. Well, particularly with, I suppose, Howard, we'd always talked about death, and you had discussed what we would like for our dying and our deaths and funerals and things like that. That changed over time because we weren't Druids when we met.
Mm-hmm.
But that there was, I always was so grateful for that time to let go slowly. So by the time he took his last breath, I was ready to let him go.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that, holding your sword for as long as you need it. And we have attachments to things, and it's best if we can give ourselves enough time, knowing we have to let it go. It's not now, but preparing, even the fact of saying, I can't do it now. I just can't. But I know at some point I will have to. That buys me time so that by the time I'm ready, and I've reduced it to, actually, this was important. It's no longer so important that I have to keep it. I am now ready to let it go with thanks, gratitude.
Mm.
And then I can take on something else. So what was it? Relinquish, restore, reconcile, and resilience. I think maybe they're the four. Or reconcile myself to what I've let go. Restore something new, something old, or whatever. And then having the resilience. And I think having that inbuilt resilience allows us to let go when we need to.
Yeah, and I think resilience also allows the new to arrive. That for me is the hope. That for me is the what next, which I find so beautiful. And I think from an archaeological point of view, I often think about these kind of moments in our history that are just, they're fact. The collapse of the Roman Empire, all of these different things where people had to very quickly change suddenly. Life doesn't stop. There is an ongoing beautiful journey still to be had. That without a shadow of a doubt, it will just look possibly radically different and feel very radically different, with different languages and even different, evolution for, long enough down the line. There's such a powerful story still to be told. And I think each one of us has to, we're in, for me, I would speak of this as a sort of European, very much aware of what I'm talking about in this sort of time frame of my life. I've had a very, very comfortable life, where we've all assumed, I've assumed that things are just great, everything's great, and world wars were blips, and subjugation and colonization was just sort of something that got done, and it's like, actually, the human story is full of resilience and reconciliation and relinquishments. And so I suppose perhaps this is just old rope. It's stuff that we have to learn because I have to learn because I've been so comfortable. But I'm deeply honored to my ancestors that I feel a little bit more well equipped to be ready. And a lot of people haven't, but I have had that. I've been able to have that career, that kind of way of looking at the world. So I do feel, change in the wind. I always see it. I've seen it in the historical record, in the archaeological record, and I know it's kind of coming. And I think it's just, as you say, just being prepared for the time. And interestingly, you can tell when you dig a site, you can tell how they left. So if it's a homestead, you can tell whether there was they left in a hurry, because you'll find a lot of personal little belongings, like little spindle whorls and bowls, and it will be quite a rich space because they've just literally dropped everything and run. And often that you can actually historically link that to a battle in the area or whatever. So you can actually see in the archaeological record when people have just had to just drop everything and go. And then you can see the other end where you see people, where you just excavate an empty ruin. There's nothing in it. People have taken the time to collect everything, and then they've gone on their way to their life wherever it is. And I think that sort of truth is still exists. I mean, that is still human, that's human possibility, is it not? You know, that may happen again. And yeah, that's very that's where perhaps I think the deep adaptation sits with archaeology, for me. You know, that it's sort of archaeology in process, perhaps.
And I was in Munster.
Munster.
Not Munster. Munster is in Ireland. Munster is in Germany. And I was taken to this museum where the peace treaty of Westphalia was signed 350 years ago, well, more than 300 years ago. And I saw a painting of the room is exactly as it was when they signed it. Beautiful carvings on the inside. And that took 5 years to negotiate. And it ended the 80 Years' War in Europe. And what really fascinated me, and so we saw a copy of the agreement with all the signatures of the peacemakers, dealers, whatever they were. But they're also using that model to broker peace in the Middle East. And I thought, wow, you know, something that we take from the ancestors or borrow from the ancestors, this worked for them. I mean, to broker a peace treaty that took 5 years, you know, of an 80-year war. And you know how people are invested in war. They make lots and lots of money. And they must have come to the stage where we can't continue this. We have too much to lose. And also that always happens when on either side of a conflict, when they both realize we can't continue this, we're losing too much. If there's something to be gained from it, yes, people keep it going. But I was really intrigued. I was really excited by the idea that they would look at that model and say, this worked then, you know, it might work now. And, you know, the teachings of the ancestors, I just thought was just absolutely wonderful.
Wow.
And that, and around brokering peace is around relinquishing.
Yeah.
And it's about reconciliation. Mark says recognition, responsibility, remorse, and reparation. I think there's lots of R's going around today, and all of them, I think, have huge validity. But to relinquish what my hold on, whatever it is I'm holding on, and then restoring peace or restoring goodwill, and then resilience to continue, and reconciliation. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Definitely. But it's not easy, and it's an ongoing thing. And I think, you know, going back to the sort of the group that we're going to put together, where all of this can come up, and we can do these things in our own lives and as a collective. It's just giving that safe space to be able to open up these kind of conversations and just see what comes out. Space. Absolutely. Going. I love that.
Yeah. So you're you've gone through all the whole journey of Druidry, and you are a storyteller.
Yeah. Well, this is, again, you know, here I am. This is the thing I always say to people: never be guilty about, never feel guilty, never put a caveat on your achievements. But I do it instantly because I think to myself, oh, I'm not an artist. I'm not a this. I'm not a writer. I'm not that. But actually, one of the greatest truths and one of the greatest gifts of the whole course was the Bardic course for me, because I really did connect to something very, very powerful. And in fact, I'm just going to show you, I started doing something called sumie pen drawing, which is a Japanese kind of pen drawing with a black pen. And I learned how to do it. And it's super druidic, because you go, you walk the land, and then whatever's taking your attention, you sit with it. You ask it, do you want me to draw you? And they say yes, or, you know, go away or whatever. But, you know, if they say yes, you draw them. And then you return back to consciousness with that place, and then you write whatever it is, free writing that place has told you. So I went from literally not knowing how to draw at all to suddenly deciding that I had to draw every single feather that I ever, where is it? So I started drawing feathers.
Ooh.
And I know. know. I just love it. It's very meditative for me, and I just really enjoy it. And I do all sorts of.
They look like two physical feathers, but they're not. One is the
physical feathers, but they're not. One is the platform, who's the drawing. Yeah, so one's the feather and one's the drawing. There's the shadow.
Beautiful.
There you go. And and then teasel for me was a really important plant during my ovate grade. So I love teasel. I'll just take any chance to sit with teasel. So yeah, so that was just really wonderful. I was just really grateful to the bardic grade to actually give me the ability to draw. And then I just suddenly thought, yes, well, we have got rituals of relinquishment, because I think it's in the ovate grade. Is it where I don't want to?
Yeah, you can't say it.
Not allowed. Okay. Yes. Okay. Not loud. Okay. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a story, because I do a lot of sort of non-fiction academic writing, and occasionally I tell a story. So I'm going to tell you a story. And it's kind of a journey with some magic in it. And anyway, sit back, everybody. You can just sit back, close your eyes, and just imagine that somebody's reading you a story, which is me. It's called A Story, imaginatively. Dawn had broken somewhere, but not here under the unbroken blanket of cloud. The wind wheeled the crows high and scattered them in the sky, and the overgrown wisteria knocked against the window of their bedroom. The letterbox downstairs whistled occasionally. They lay in bed, cosy under the thick duvet. The dog needs a walk before you go to work. A warm hand reached out and touched the soft skin on her belly. It gently moved over and around it, drawing her close. They lay touching, breathing into each other, sleepy and peaceful, curled into the warmth of their bodies. I'll go then. She kissed his closed eyelids and turned to get out of the bed. In the darkness, she put on her socks, tucking in her pyjama bottoms, pulled on her warmest navy blue fisherman's jumper bought at the coast, and went downstairs. Sleepily, she pulled on her wellies, and after looking out of the window, decided to put on her raincoat. You coming? She asked Dog. Silly question, she added, as he started knocking wellies over with his bounds and knocking into her legs with glee. Buttoned up, she paused before opening the door. The doorway from hearth to elements was clear today. Some days there was barely a transition, but today, as she opened the door, a shower of trapped gutter water dropped onto her head, and the door instantly began to pull away from her grasp in the howling wind. Some edges are pretty sharp, aren't they? She grinned at Dog. He bounded off in hot pursuit of a phantom cat. Shutting the door, she turned and gave herself to the day. The wind was blustery and noisy. The rain had already told her that it was in charge, horizontal and bitter against her skin. Ouch, she muttered as it stung. Most days she liked to go out before dawn. Liminal times, spaces and portals had held a special fascination for her recently. Times like dawn and dusk held such clear messages for her. She did her best thinking and intuitive work at these times. These were the times in her life when she felt most in touch. Her cup was filled by the sacred most easily at these times and in those places in the landscape. To feel the slowly brightening day wake up around her was one of her most precious pleasures. She had missed that time of day, so the messages were much more earthbound, such as, take your waterproof, and be careful in the woods in case you get hit by a falling branch. I must fix that gutter, she muttered to herself. The chickens, awake and out of their house, were wet, bedraggled and fussy. She threw some crusts over the high fence to them and said good morning. Why do they insist on staying outdoors on days like this, she wondered. Creatures are such calm creatures. Chickens are such calm creatures. They'd been a domesticated species for thousands of years. They're distant relatives of the European pheasants that had been brought over by the Romans, but had existed for a very long time before that in far Asian forest birds. When she was pregnant, she had loved to spend her days around the chickens, cleaning out their house, pottering, giving them scraps, or during the long, heavy summer months, just sitting in a sunny spot in their enclosure, her and Dog, watching them. Sometimes one would come and peck her bare toes and she would giggle. Even with thick wellies on, they still came and pecked at them. I really love you girls, she said. She meant it. The family had long taken chickens in that had been farmed in battery farms, living in cages the size of a sheet of printed paper in artificial light. When they came to her, they were bald, emaciated, and terrified. Some chickens died within days of being exposed to pathogens in the soil. Some took weeks, if not all their lives, to return from that place of terror they'd been trapped in, pecking each other, fearful of humans and very scared. Yet all of them were beautiful souls who needed a chance in life to reveal their magic. Industrial food production assumes erroneously that a chicken's only magic is to lay eggs and do so regularly. Yet what these chickens had taught was that their true magic was in their souls. This particular group of chickens was just over a year old and had been with the family since the summer. The week before, they had experienced snow for the first time, which caused great hilarity among the girls. "This one's saying, 'No way, I'm not going out there, I'll get super cold feet,'" giggled the 7-year-old, fluent in chicken. One ran out into it, making a beeline for a tasty morsel, only to find it was a twig kicked up by the dog. She stopped, made a reprimanding "Burk," and turned to peck at the frozen water canister. Peck, peck. Mum got a shovel and smashed the ice as the chicken looked on like a nosy, bossy manager. She smiled as the chicken filled her beak and lifted her head to gurgle the water down her throat. Whatever a chicken does, it does it with completely focused attention, she noticed. It may seem to us a trivial thing to be so focused on, but to a chicken, every single action grips them completely in its magic until it's done, like looking at a twig or drinking water, even picking toes or running after the dog. One chicken still hadn't completely grown all her feathers back after arriving seven months previously, and she'd been named Avagddi, pronounced Avagddi, who was the Welsh goddess, Ceridwen's very ugly child, in honour of her utter ugliness. Avagddi still exhibited the deepest wounds from her time imprisoned in the cage. She was still very wary of the other chickens, who would peck her remorselessly. She did not like to be picked up and always waited in the background when scraps were dropped, waiting until her more boisterous coop mates had barged their way in and grabbed their morsel. "Here's a crust for you," she said, throwing it into a corner where Avagddi would run and eat it without being mobbed. Another lesson from the chickens is that they are not kind. They are still wild at heart, living in their own dispassionate world in their own dispassionate way. She moved on, past the chickens, out of the garden gate and onto the moor. Up on the low hill they climbed, battered and stung by the oncoming north wind and rain as they combined to give her a dose of their raw elemental power. Hunched against the dripping rain, she failed completely to stop it going up her sleeves and down into the face opening. Her coat flapped loudly and the rain clattered on the fabric of the hood that her hearing was nearly entirely impaired. Yet something made her stop and turn round. Halfway up the hill, the view was already opening up behind the house. She could see the rooftops of the trees, the glints of the swollen river, and far beyond, the rise of the southern moors. Now the north wind was at her back, trying to push her bodily back down the hill. Yet she stood, braced, poised and alert. Something had caught her attention. Looking out, nothing seemed out of place. The world she knew, her house, the village below where her friends lived, the shop, the little school where her children were all there, laying peacefully in front of her. She turned back around and kept walking. Dog tore around her in wide circles. The top of the hill is marked with a single standing stone. For many years she'd been coming up here to wonder at it. Some say it's a glacial erratic. Some said it once belonged to an entire stone circle, or that it was a way marker for an ancient route across the moors. The wind up here was uninterrupted and fierce. She had to force her way through invisible air to get to the stone. As she always did, she paused, hand outstretched, hovering an inch or so above it. In her mind, she doubted she would feel anything in this howling gale, but it was a ritual she never failed to undertake. When greeting a stone, a tree, an animal, and most certainly a human, it was important to connect to their energy first. Some beings were like open books. She felt their energy waxing and waning as clearly as reading the moon phases. Some took far more time to connect with, and some took forever, much, much longer than the span of her lifetime. This particular stone had taken its time to introduce itself to her, but on one sunny day, in fact when she'd been pregnant with her third child and had been visiting for some time, the stone had responded to her hand hovering there. A warm fuzz emanated from the top of the stone that day, a sensation that wasn't uniform over the entire surface. She'd gasped aloud in happiness. Stone magic is slow. It takes eons to understand. Many of the stone circles that had been erected long before the particular stone energy had been truly connected to. She was sure of it. She had wondered at this before. What did the builders of the great circles that dot our landscape learn from those stones in that first generation? Is what they learned the same as what we learn today? Today, nothing at all happened as she put out her hand. No sensation met her palm. But again, suddenly, she was gripped with a desire to turn round. A voice, it seemed, shouted a clear instruction to her. Look. She turned and saw. To her left, in the east, the sun had suddenly broken through the ragged clouds and made a slanting ray of light that illuminated her. Sheets of rain in front of her face sparkled or danced as each drop caught the light as it bounced and refracted all around her. Drips forming on her hood shook like crystal balls, iridescent and brilliant. Her wet eyelashes caught the light and she was suddenly blinded, cocooned inside the water as it split and made rainbows over and over again around her. The wind and the rain rewrote patterns of light before her, swirling and falling, bouncing on blades of grass, on her coat, on the dog's fur as he stood, quiet now and lolling his tongue. Nothing stayed still, and yet for a long, long moment, this broken, glorious light show played all around her as she smiled and sobbed and sang with joy, not sure if it was the rain or her tears that she was a part. Then it was over. The sun hid behind a bank of cloud and the brilliance diminished. She caught her breath, deeply alive to the moment that had just been, trying desperately to not let it go. But it passed, as all beautiful moments must. Sighing, she looked at Dog, who looked back at her, now just a wet and fed-up animal, ready to go home for his breakfast. Me too, she said. In companionable silence, they allowed the wind to push them back down the wet moor, through the gate, past the chickens, and through the door. A little shower of gutter water fell on her as she opened it. I'll sort that today, she thought. Her gaze fell upon a small feather that her daughter had picked up in the autumn on one of their walks. It was a pheasant feather, a short and inconspicuous one of the little hidden ones that keeps the bird warm and flying. The wind had picked it up off the window and dropped it on the floor. She picked it up, putting it back on the windowsill. Smiling at small magics, she went to get the children ready for school.
Oh, that's beautiful. Just absolutely beautiful. Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, there's so many parts to that. I just love, your description of the chickens and also, and I suppose it brings back in, how we behave in the world, how traumatized those chickens are when they are rescued. I mean, they're rescue hens, aren't they? To think of that poor featherless chicken, 7 months on, still featherless and nervous with her own kind. And just lovely. It's a lovely, where they can they find some respite in the end.
Yeah.
I mean, not all chickens like that get rescued, but it's just lovely that in the story that they were there. So there's a lovely, beautiful story. I was so there. Thank you, Harriet. Remarkable story, exceptional storytelling, beautiful story, and lovely read. I appreciated the accompanying sighs and raised eyebrows. So beautiful. Absolutely. It was just, that was so amazing. Oh, I love the story.
You're very just we haven't taken the chickens with us. Just to let you know that Vagli is live and well, living in Teesdale, an old neighbour's farm. So she's doing very well, still laying eggs, and she's got all her feathers back. They took a long time, but she did eventually get all her feathers back. So there you go.
She was restored.
Yes,
and she was restored, reconciled herself to her new life, and obviously has displayed lots of resilience.
Yes. Yeah.
And has relinquished her anxiety. So lovely. And Anne Beer says, so many good leads for further exploration and reflection. Thank you both for a beautiful discussion and a memorable story.
It's been a dream.
So, what a storytelling gift you have. This is from Jules. I felt caught up in it and part of it. So many blessings in a single morning. This is one from Gabriella. Do we have spells for restoring feathers to chickens?
Oh, just time.
And then Aqua says, what is the story's title? Can I find that somewhere? Aqua just is not a member and just by chance found this conversation this evening. So she's been commenting a number of times. So thank you.
Well, that's I do post things occasionally on my blog, so I don't know whether there's a way of putting that up somewhere. But another thing that I did, sort of the bardic element during lockdown, was I did a poem a day for 60 days. And it's, I don't know, that kind of daily reflection was really, really good. So that's up there as well. So, yeah.
What is your blog? I'll just type it in if you tell me.
Yeah, I'll just put it, in fact, it's nifray.com. I've just sent it in your chat, so you can just cut and paste that.
Okay. Well, let me get back into here. And this will go to all, right.
Great. It's very disorganized, and but yeah, do read it and enjoy yourself. It's just a reflection on life over the last few years for me, really.
Wonderful. Harriet, we've come to the end of our time, and it's been an absolute joy talking to you. And I mean, there was so much, and I look forward to being there as part of the listening circle. And it's just been wonderful chatting to you. So I will say goodnight to you. You stay where you are, because I usually do with Mike is we go over the comments and just to read them, because thank you all for your comments, but obviously they come so fast we don't get to read them on the hoof. So we will do that now. So I'll say goodnight to you and thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been amazing. Thank you so much as well.
So thank you all for being here this evening, this morning, this afternoon. And thank you for your wonderful comments and in engaging so well with Harriet and the topic. So I look forward to seeing you again next week for another fireside chat where I'm very interesting. Well, I can't say I have a very interesting guest. All the guests are interesting. So I look forward to seeing you then. So in the meantime, be well. Slán go fóill.